Welcome to the new Rainmaker podcast, a weekly show for visionary founders and team members alike to come together and share the heartfelt, the cringe, and the radically honest truths about what it's really like to build and work for some of the world's most exposed brands on the biggest internet stages. I'm your host, Veronica Romney, and after working for some of the biggest names in the online space myself, I've learned that it takes both leadership and dream team collaboration to truly scale a company to its greatest potential. You can build a business alone, but you cannot scale it on your own. And my goal on today's episode and every episode is to inspire our dreamers and empower our leaders. Make sure to follow and share my podcast with your friends and colleagues, and feel free to tag me on Instagram at vromney with your insights and ahas. Now let's make it rain on today's episode. Dr. Greg, welcome to the Rainmaker podcast. I am super excited to have you.
Thanks so much. It's so great to be here with you.
It's surreal because, little known fact, I actually worked with Dr. Greg at Catholic Psych for months and months and months, and have listened to your podcast forever and ever. And now you're on my podcast. So it's like a surreal moment for me.
Yeah, this is pretty awesome. I'm excited to see this get going, and really honored to be a guest for you now.
Yeah. I'm going to introduce you the way that I want to, and then you're going to, be humble and be like, oh, stop. But so I'll do it after you. Why don't you actually introduce yourself to the Rainmaker community?
Feel free to say any of the nice things that you'd like to. I'm not going to stop you. Well, I am Dr. Greg Bottaro. I am a founder of the Catholic Psych Institute, it started as a group practice or a private practice to bring together a Christian perspective on the human person with the practice of psychology. And since then, we've grown to a large group practice now. We've got over 12 therapists and now developed into much more of an outreach. We create resources that bridge that gap between faith and science and help people get a sense of well-being and flourishing in a really grounded way. And so we've started the podcast and courses and books, and actually just launched a certification program to help other people learn how to mentor and coach others from a really grounded perspective. And so that's professionally what I do. I'm married almost 10 years now, anniversary coming up next month, and we have baby number 7 on the way. So that's probably one of the most exciting things going on right now.
And they have, if you ever seen like The Sound of Music, this is what I picture about your family. Like I go into this beautiful property in Connecticut, all the kids are frolicking, they're all perfectly well behaved. I did influence one child to like me more because, it was rough going at first. And then I bought her a cake, and that seemed to win me over, or win her over, I should say.
Absolutely. That was immediate.
But Dr. Greg, one of my closest friends, and honestly has helped me in my own CEO journey when it was real rough at the beginning and denying my identity. Let's just start with that. But you are one of the most brilliant visionaries I have ever, and this is why I know you wouldn't say this about yourself, but like we're talking Elon Musk level. Like when you think of the visionaries that everybody aspires to, that you read about in books, your brain thinks that way. The vision you have for your company is like bigger than Walt Disney. And that's just how you are. And then what you've done by integrating, faith with traditional therapy that tries to do its best to avoid faith, and yet faith is what determines somebody's real identity, right? I think it's just fascinating, and you've helped so many people unleash themselves from really dark corners and pain.
Well, I am totally humbled by that, and I really am grateful for you. And I can't wait to open up our conversation, because there's so many ways that I can also return that and bring your role into this picture, because you've been instrumental in unlocking so much.
Well, thank you. Okay, so I voxed Dr. Greg this morning, and I was like, okay, here's my vision for this podcast, because I think there's a lot of conversation about different stages and phases of a business growth from what we see in front of the curtain. And a lot of that can be defined by different revenue thresholds. Like, okay, when you're just starting out, this is what your business looks like, and this is what you need to do, and this is how you need to, legally protect yourself. And then when you get to $500,000, then you get to $1 million, then you get to 2, right? There's a lot of that front dialogue, but you are the person that gets in the minds of others. And when I was working with you, I've never worked with a CEO who was more self-aware of their own internal dialogue ever than you. Like countless times you would come to me or vox me like, okay, so I was talking with myself and my parts, and this is what we were feeling. So
Starting to get
really,
a little crazy in here.
so I was telling Dr. Greg in the box this morning, like, it would be great to have a conversation of what some of the internal dialogue is like for a CEO at different stages of a business growth. Because we don't talk about that enough. We talk about overwhelm. We talk about, wanting to burn it to the ground. We talk about it when it gets too hard and we have breakdowns. That's when I feel like most of the conversation starts. But there's just a lot of internal dialogue that we have with ourselves in our journey of starting something from nothing. And I know I've had that, and you helped me with mine. So is that a fair topic? I'm really excited about this.
It's an awesome topic. I mean, it's honestly, it's really our wheelhouse, and it's where I spend most of my day anyway. And so, even as a company, our team knows that that's the normal daily conversation. If a week goes by without somebody crying, it's not really a productive week. It's probably a vacation week. So it's, and we just really embrace that because we really do enter deeply into the process ourselves, and what we're doing for other people, we do first for ourselves.
Mhm.
And so that's how we can really walk with people, because we're really comfortable with the messiness of the interior life. And so opening that up here in this kind of perspective of sort of business growth and CEO, that's not normally where we operate. And
Mhm.
so, I do that. I have private coaching clients and things like that. But in terms of a daily sort of company perspective, we're usually talking about the therapy process. So I'm really excited to open this up here.
Yes. And you've helped me with my own journey. And by the way, and I've told you this before, and you don't like it when I say it, but I'm like, if I ever stopped being my own visionary, I'd come work for you in a second, because working with a whole bunch of therapists is like the greatest thing in the world, because everybody's just focused on their own personal development at all times, which is it's intoxicating. It really is.
I mean, I don't know how, I think there's other practices and other therapists out there that don't really focus on
Hmm.
that. And it's really just a side job.
Hmm.
Or their job is just a side part of their life, and
Hmm.
I don't know how you could actually do that.
Hmm.
It's like too much to
Hmm.
actually bear when you do enter into the messiness of other people's lives without really making peace with the fact that this has got to be a way of life.
Yeah.
And so that's what we do. So I'm glad that's attractive. We would welcome you with open arms, as I've always told you, as
I
we've
know.
tried to convince you, I
I
think,
know.
at first.
This is true, guys. This is like a
It was
perfect.
actually, that was for you, help, walking through and helping sort of unpack some of your own identity stuff.
Mhm.
That was always, for me, in the back of my mind, is like, all right, I could lead this conversation in a way that is serving my interests, or I could really see that this is really your potential that we're talking about here. So, in
Well.
in one of my moments of charity, I decided to put myself last there.
That's true. Okay, so let's level set the conversation, because not everybody has ever studied internal family systems or parts, and quite frankly, I remember even the first time that you described it to me, and I'm no stranger to therapy, but there's different models of therapy or different disciplines, I guess. And so even though I've done like EFT or different things, doesn't mean that's the same. And I remember you sitting with me and talking. He's like, "Have you ever seen?" I'm a mom of little kids, so of course the answer is yes. But have you seen the movie Inside Out? It's like that. I'm like, what? So why don't you just really quickly, like, what is parts? And when we are talking to parts, what the freak are we talking about besides like being crazy? It might sound crazy at first.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that the way we think about this comes from a psychological diagnosis of psychopathology, and what we now or call dissociative identity
Hmm.
disorder, used to be called multiple personality disorder. And the sort of development of the theory now is that it's not this black or white thing. Either you're this unity of a healthy person, or you have this disorder, and then you have these multiple personalities. We actually all have subpersonalities, and these are, what we can call parts. When we are traumatized, or for whatever reason we sort of get crystallized into one part or another, and then there's really a spectrum between health and disorder, where we're more or less integrated, with a lot of different parts sort of always being present. And the image I use a lot of times is to have a boardroom table, when we have all these little members of our internal company. And a really integrated person is when the self is sitting in the CEO seat, and all these other departments are represented with their members at the table. And then in unhealthy situations, one part might sort of mutiny and kick the CEO out and take that director's seat, even though it's really only coming from like the finance perspective or the HR perspective or something else. So we have a lot of these parts. And yes, the movie Inside Out, the Disney movie, the Pixar film, was created with a consultant from this particular psychological theory. So it's not just a coincidence that it's a nice analogy. It actually was created like this. And so we have the main character, this little girl, Riley. And then throughout the movie, we see in her head that she's got these different characters and each one has its own perspective. And we can oversimplify it and say that each one represents an emotion, but actually it's more than an emotion. Our subpersonalities each have its own past, its own perspective of the present, its own hopes of the future, its role of protecting certain dimensions of our self. And so what can be really helpful is, instead of sort of aligning with one part against another, which we are sort of taught to do through pop psychology. Here's a perfect example. If we talk about like the quote unquote inner critic or the imposter syndrome, these can be words that represent different parts, different subpersonalities. So if I'm cranking along and I have a great idea and I go to put it into practice, then all of a sudden the doubts come flooding in. It's like, this is never going to work. You know, that inner critic says, who do you think you are? What were you doing? Like, coming up with this idea? That's stupid. And pop psychology is like, slam the inner critic, just shut it up, shut it down, get it out of here. Like, you know, think positive thoughts and put yourself ahead and, you know, envision and manifest and all this stuff. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Let's slow down a sec. Where did that other part come from? Why did that inner critic show up? And on deeper analysis, we'll find that it has a reason for being there. And not only that, but it's a real part of you. And when you just try to shove it in the closet, it's still there, which is why people do that kind of self-talk, pop psych, self-work forever. And you might lock it in that closet this week, but a month later or a week later, you're definitely going to be dealing with that voice again. So our approach is to actually learn what this part of you is trying to say and find out what the underlying positive is, what its underlying purpose is, what its underlying needs are. And just like each one of us has underlying needs, every part of us has an underlying need. And if we can actually listen to those parts with open curiosity and attentiveness, then we discover that there are important things there that we could, number one, value, and number two, actually help to resolve. And that changes the whole internal working system. The whole environment becomes a place of peace and calm and open curiosity, and then a lot of creativity, which, side note, to especially a creator community of entrepreneurship, there's reasons why we have writer's blocks. There's reasons why we sort of hit a wall and can't think past the next step. We need creativity, and creativity is directly affected to our anxiety and stress system. So when we have all of that inner conflict, we're actually squelching our creativity. Not only are we locking parts of ourselves in the closet, but we're also shooting ourselves in the foot. So there's a lot of benefit to not doing that anymore, and that's what we teach people how to do.
Oh God, you're so brilliant. Okay, so when you first explained this to me, and again, you did use the Inside Out reference point because I'm a mom, and of course, I've watched that movie many times. So Riley has anger, and she has joy, and she has sadness and disgust, and it's all these characters. And when you're like, none of them are bad, none of them are bad. In fact, not only are they not bad, but they're there for your good. And in fact, you know, the movie has 5 characters because you can only have so many in a movie. But in real life, you probably have like, how many would you say? Hundreds, thousands of parts inside?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We could say, you know, we could probably find 10 or 20 parts pretty easily. And then the
Mm-hmm.
more that we grow in the
Mm-hmm.
self-awareness, some of the more recent stuff in this system, this is like sort of over complex, but they're saying that each part has its own parts. So it kind of multiplies
Yeah.
from there. But
Yeah. But they're all for your good. And I have I mean, I've been a student of personal development. I've been to the Tony Robbins and the Rachel Hollis and all the like there's, and I love them, by the way. Like, I very recently heard Ed Milet speak on stage and was a ball of tears because he just hit me so hard. So, but it's interesting because one of the common practices that I was taught is like, when you hear that inner critic, when you hear that negative voice inside, give it a name and then tell it to like piss off, right? So like for me, it was Becky with the good hair. And then when I get my fiance out, then fiance tells Becky to bug off, right? Like I had this whole thing. And then you're like telling me like, actually, Becky with the good hair is probably trying to protect you from something, or communicate something, or bring to your, like at a boardroom, like everybody has, the financial officer always gets like the negative role because they're like, that's a great idea, but it's going to cost too much. Like
Right.
always the finance guy gets the kick, or it's the engineer that's like, wait, we want to build what and how long? Like, right. But all of them, especially in a team setting, we need the tension, we need the pushback. If not, we're going to go bankrupt. So everybody has a role within a team, but also has a role within ourselves.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So I feel like the title of this podcast is going to be something along the lines of like Inside Out with an SEO mind, or CEO mind, SEO, CEO mind. Okay. So now I can either start with my personal story and we can talk about my parts, or we can talk about your personal story, because again, you are extremely self-aware as a CEO. And I know there were many times that you came to me like, okay, so I was talking to myself, but how about this? I'll start with mine, but we'll get the ball rolling. But I came to you in a state of like extreme internal dialogue, and it was like a food fight in my brain, because there was the part of me that was like, no, I'm not a visionary, I'm not a visionary, I'm not a visionary, I'm an integrator, I'm behind the scenes, I prefer to be behind the scenes, I can run a company A to Z behind the scenes, I don't want to show my face, and like I don't want to have to get on social media every day, and I don't want to have to compromise my life, and I don't want to compromise my integrity, and I don't want anybody to aspire to become me, to buy from me. And that just really bothered me, that narrative. And then I remember you very kindly pointed out, he's like, there was one time when we were talking, you're like, well, that's interesting that you say that, because then in all of your profile pictures, it's you in your power stance on stage. Should we
Exactly.
talk about this? And it's interesting. This just happened to me again. I was at a conference last week, first ever Funnel Hacking Live, and Russell Brunson was on stage, and he had the whole room kind of shout out. He's like, "How many of you are CEOs and dreamers and visionaries?" And half the room. It was really loud. I was like, "Wow!" And then, how many of you would consider yourself operators, delegators, integrators, the people that execute, for the company? And then it was really loud. It was almost equal, where it was like 50-50 in the room, which kind of shocked all of us. And I remember when everybody screamed for the operator, there was a part of me, even still today, Dr. Greg, where I was like, I wanted to scream. I
Mm,
wanted to scream, to be like, oh man, can you imagine not having to be the attractive character? Can you just staying and rocking it and no one has to know? And then I like went to bed all in turmoil with myself, like, who am I again? And then at 3:30, I woke up in the morning and couldn't fall asleep, because I just had visions after visions of the company and where I want to take it. And then like wrote ferociously these notes and like sent it to my husband at 4:30 in the morning. Like, I have a vision for this company. We're going to change thousands of lives. So there's both parts of me still,
yes.
still. Okay, psychoanalyze me now.
And that's the point. That's the goal. And it's
Mhm,
like you're always going to have both parts of you
mhm, mhm,
because it's actually you.
mhm,
And this is again this whole sort of shift in the psychological theory and the way that psychology gives a framework to the rest of culture. A lot of times psychology sort of leads the charge and trailblazes a sense of humanity, and then eventually it makes its way into sort of normal
mhm,
parlance and the way that people normally think about themselves. So, for a long time it's been like I am one person, and that's because of psychological theory. That before psychology, before the last couple hundred years, like that wouldn't even been a way to think. It wasn't, it's different the way that the field matches it up. Now the field is saying we are one and multiple. And so it's going to take a little time for that to trickle into the way that we think, but it's actually who you are. It's not a mistake. It's not, a disorder. It's actually who we are. We have a singular unity, but you also have all these different facets of who you are. And so we have to make peace. That food fight inside, that
mhm,
turmoil, it will only be resolved when you can make peace. It's why this is called internal family systems. If you think about it, it was actually the guy who developed this was a family systems therapist. and he would have families of multiple people come into his office. And it's like, if you're going to go to family therapy and you have these different members in the room, there
Mm.
might be a troublemaker, there might be a problem, there might be an alcoholic, there might be some issue, but the solution is never going to be, let's kick Uncle George out of the family.
Mm-hmm.
Or our daughter Jenny, who's having emotional problems going through adolescence, like, she needs to leave the family. That will never be the answer to good family therapy, because Jenny's always going to be a part of the family, and you have to figure out how to make that work. And so the founder basically just took that model and said, well, can I see that happening inside a person? So if you've got the integrator inside of you, and you have the visionary inside of you, and you've got Becky with good hair, and you've got Beyonce, it's like, this is part of your family. Like, these people have to be able to get around the table, even if it's only once a year at Thanksgiving, and like have some ground rules and figure out how to have like a productive meeting or discussion or time together.
Yeah.
And actually, you learn, just like with the uniqueness and beauty of every person, like, everybody does have a gift and something to contribute and some reason that it's interesting to listen to someone's story, if you can get over yourself and really put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And so the same thing happens internally, and every one of those parts showing up is going to serve your purpose, and the sum is greater than the parts, and it ends up becoming a really great benefit.
Yeah. It's interesting because I, even as you're speaking, I'm like having this kind of big moment right now where I'm like, I wouldn't even be here doing what I'm doing if I didn't stop fighting with myself. Because I was
Mm.
fighting with myself. I had to pick one. There was no choice in the multiple choice question that it was all of the above. And I didn't, it was never framed that way. I was never taught it that way. That paradigm did not exist. So in my head, I had to choose. I couldn't be visionary, integrator. Like, I had to make a decision. And then here's the irony. Literally, again, you guys, I'm literally having this moment live. I'm having this realization that,
I can
like,
see it in your face, just
yeah,
for your listeners. I know I know that look on your face.
like, oh my gosh. But like, even the Rainmaker residency, I designed it as a 2-person program where most programs are tailored to one. And I built it, as difficult as it was, to serve both the visionary CEO and the Rainmaker, who is an execution player. And I built the program to support both of them and to honor both of them and to have both of them play nice to each other. And because I feel like that's the number one reason that these critical leaders don't have success or get turned over as much. But that's because I stopped fighting with my parts with each other. Holy crap. It's like a therapy
Dude,
session for
it's
me.
not a productive week unless there are tears.
Oh man. Hey, it's V. We'll get back to today's interview, but first, I wanted to share a little bit more on how I can turn your team member into a revenue generating marketing rainmaker for your company. I get this question a lot from CEOs just like you, so I decided to share my syllabus with you for free. You'll see how I make the perfect marketing leader, team, content factory, launch, and roadmap, so you don't have to be the only one thinking about making money for your company anymore. Head to veronicaromney.com or click the link in my show notes to get your hands on my free Fortune 5 framework syllabus. Now let's get back to today's episode.
No, but I was actually going to say this also for you, as knowing you and knowing that those are gifts that you bring to the table that come from those parts. That's exactly why you can do what you're doing now, and that's why it's going to be so helpful and powerful for so many people, because that's, it's great to have a visionary set of gifts, and it's great to have an integrator set of gifts, or a person centered set of gifts, and at the end of the day, like, they're two totally different skill sets, and not a lot of people have both.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, when you showed up and you're like, I have both, which one do I pick? It's like, whoa, wait a minute. Why in the world would you cut one out when the synergy between those two is going to be something totally unique and not often seen? And now you've tapped into that and you're offering it, and people can all share in benefiting from that, which I think is just absolutely profound.
Okay, so you get all the credit is what we're saying because you're the one that enlightened me and showed me that I didn't have to choose and say
Well,
goodbye to somebody.
I'm gonna get around to. I'm gonna tell my
Yeah, yeah,
story.
yeah. Let's do that. Your turn to get well. If I cry, then you got to cry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I have been. I think I actually did have my moment. We did a company retreat last 2 weeks ago, and what we do is really hard work,
Mhm,
and it's a lot of vulnerability. And oftentimes, people in therapy will go through graduate school, and then when they're first starting off, they have a really hard time with all of those voices of self-doubt and everything else. And you feel like an imposter because, like, who am I to hold the emotional life of somebody else and really enter into their interiority? And then people work through that, and we in our company, in our culture, sort of value that as a model and example to hold on to in continuing professional and personal development. So we really elevate our newest members and see them as the shining lights that we all need to look to. It's like the way that you feel is how all of us should be acting.
mhm,
Because if we start to get too comfortable with ourselves and feel and we become complacent, really. And so we have to maintain a little bit of that sort of on the edge of your seat nervousness. Obviously, we want to still have the freedom to really tap into what we can do, but there's a little bit of that that's really healthy. And I was sharing all this, and I was saying I've been out of the therapy part of our company for a while now, but I was sharing with them that this has been really hard for me even to continue growing our company. And so even stepping out of that and into this sort of leadership, and now I'm doing a lot of product development
mhm,
and just sort of forging the path forward at the same time. And I actually was talking about you coming into our company last year,
mhm.
almost 2 years ago now, and being there to really stir things up and make me especially very uncomfortable.
You're welcome.
And I was like, and if it wasn't for that, and if I was closed off to the idea that I'm supposed to be growing continually and not leading by example, then we wouldn't have grown to where we are today. And I was thinking about this in preparation, thinking about today, and thinking about these steps and the points of growth and growing a company and that kind of thing. And actually, I was thinking about a shared coach that we both know, Helen,
Mhm,
shared with us the Millionaire Master Plan,
mhm,
which is a book by Roger James Hamilton, I think his name is. And he's got this lighthouse with all these steps, and there's all these colors, and there's like 5 types of person, and then it's a very complex system here, and I couldn't tell you which color or number or anything else I am right now, but there was one takeaway from this book that has affected me and I've carried with me all along, and then you like directly tapped into it. And it's that to move from one step to the next, we have to go out of our comfort zone and do something really different. But to go from that step to the next step past it, you might have to do something totally contrary.
mhm,
And that if you want to grow, there's always going to be another step. And in many ways, some of the previous hurdles that you had to get over, you might have to re engage in the opposite direction. So, one example is you go from, working a 9 to 5 and you want freedom. And you're like, all right, I'm going to like take the risk of venturing out on my own because I want to be my own boss and I don't want to work the 9 to 5 anymore. And I want to set my own schedule. And then you do it and it's successful. And you're like, I get to do my own thing now. I can work on vacation if I want to, and I could do this and I could do that. That's great. There's a lot of people that stay at that level and they're totally happy. But what if you want to do more?
mhm,
What if you want to grow even bigger? And this is the point when you came into my life in our company's history, and it's like, well, you guys really should have a meeting every morning. And it's like, a meeting every morning? What are you talking about? I did this to get away from meetings every day.
mhm,
And it's like, oh, that freedom that got me one step further, actually, now I have to be willing to sacrifice
mhm,
if I want to go bigger.
mhm,
And everything I thought I knew, and it's, also entrepreneurial, bootstrap startup mindset. Like, I do it all myself. I wear 34 hats and I can do all these things. and I know I can count on myself, and I
Yep.
got myself further than I ever would have done if I just listened to what they told me to do in grad school. And here I am now with all this success. And it's like, oh, but now you have to start trusting other people.
Yep.
It's like, oh, shoot. But I got here because I was trusting myself.
Hmm.
And it's like, yeah, but do you want to stay here or do you
Yeah.
want to grow more?
Yeah.
And it's this overall sense of continual growth that, when you have somebody working with you who has the big picture perspective and also can connect with you on that personal level, that's when things really come alive. And so, that's what I see happen with me. I had all those different parts and those different voices and different things like that were happening along the way. But you came in when we were ready, I think, to expand, to really grow our people team. And
Hmm.
it took a lot to get
Hmm.
there, and it was a lot of challenge for me, but you were definitely instrumental in that happening.
Well, and create. So we laugh because, like, who likes meetings? But it's interesting because you leave the 9 to 5 container. So it's a container, right? The 9 to 5 corporate kind of container where everybody, you just feel like worker ants. And you're like, screw that. I'm going to be a maverick. I'm going to do my own thing, I'm gonna set my own rules, freedom, brave hearts, freedom across the field on a horse. And then as you invite more people to your work party and your work family, you have to now provide them a container for them to feel psychologically safe to do their best work. It's like children really appreciate the walls of a playground, as because they feel safe to know that this is the walls of my playground.
Right.
And I remember when I left for my maternity leave, back when I was working at corporate, I had my baby and I came back way too soon. It was like 8 weeks I came back because I just want, to prove it to everybody that I was coming back. So I came, that's a whole other story, but I came back after 8 weeks. And I remember one of my team members, Patrick, Patty, we were having our first one-on-one after I got back. And he's like, V, man, I missed you. I'm like, really? Because he was just like a free spirit kind of guy. And he's still one of my favorite people. And I'm like, why'd you miss me? And he's like, because with you, I know where the walls of my playground are, and it makes me feel safe. And I was like,
Mm.
and I didn't really, I thought it was a really cute analogy or whatever, and I didn't really understand the full depth of what he was actually saying or how I was making him feel by leading in a certain way until now. I've had a sampling of lots of different leadership styles, but like that was pretty profound, that the container that you left to do your own thing is the container or a version of that container that you have to provide for others for them to feel safe.
Yeah, and it's like they're just different roles, and you have
Yes.
to really know what those roles are because to have like that the visionary adventureness and
Mhm.
courage to step out into the unknown and
Mhm.
everything like that. If what you're doing is going to get bigger, that it
Mhm.
brings other people on, you don't want a whole bunch of visionaries trying to like work on the same thing.
Yeah, it's like bumper
It's
cars.
like the in-laws are great to come over to help out with the kids, but like
Go
they're
home.
not equal parents.
Uh-huh.
And we got to make sure everybody knows which lane they stay in.
Mhm.
And then you realize, and this was happening when you came in, it's like, I was like, well, people can figure it out. Like that's the freedom I want to give them. It's like they should like that's why
Uh-huh.
I'm doing what I'm doing. I want them to have that too.
Mhm.
And then you're like giving me feedback from the team and you're like they're like pretty disheveled and upset because you're not giving them any walls to their playground. I was like, well, they can figure it out. That's like the best part of doing this here. And
Yeah.
it's like they don't want to figure it out.
Yeah.
They don't have the same mentality and it's not their baby.
Right.
And you use that analogy. It's like
Mhm.
that's so important. It's like the
Mhm.
things you're willing to do to sacrifice for your own kid, your babysitter's not about to do,
Mhm. Mhm.
nor should they.
Mhm.
And so that's where, having this bigger perspective, it's like, all right, my personality got me here, but I'm going to have to actually develop my personality if I want to get there. And that takes a lot of that self-work, that self-awareness, that working through these parts, this not squashing different parts of us, but allowing them all to come to the table with proper guidance from outside help that you can actually grow.
Well, and doing it in a way that doesn't, in an unhealthy, what I see in an unhealthy way is, in the process of putting the playground to this company that is expanding so everybody feels psychologically safe to play and go down the slides and do their things. You don't, sometimes what happens, you start resenting the team because what the team starts to represent for you is the slowing down of innovation or the slowing down of execution. Because when it was you, yourself, and I, you could like code a website in 15 minutes, especially you, Dr. Craig. Like you're so pragmatic. Like you can solve a problem in 50 different ways that the normal person would be like, what did you just do? And that's how your brain works. That's just literally the brain that you have been given by God. And not everybody operates in that way. And that's not to say one is better than the other. It's just the facts are the facts. But what I've noticed is some of the internal dialogue with my CEOs, because I get the Voxer venting, the external processing when they're walking around, and it's just like a series of like 7 Voxers.
Yeah.
And they're processing that like now they feel like they're starting to resent their team because now they're going slower when it was just themselves. They could go much faster. They feel like they're spending all this time trying to train somebody when they could just do it them. Like you hear a lot of that internal dialogue. And then they'll break down like, I can't do this by myself, but I don't know how to let it go. Like, and I've seen you do speaking of the retreats, when I've come and at one point, everybody starts crying. It's like the greatest thing ever in a great way, guys, in a great way. But I remember even for you sitting on the couch one time, I'll never forget this comment you said, because I was like, okay, Dr. Greg, kick it off. Like, be the visionary, tell the team like your truest vision. And you looked at us, and you're like, you guys can't handle my truest vision. If I told you what my vision was for the company, everybody would walk out the door because you're already like 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Like, now we're going to space in a Catholic therapist rocket ship. Like, that's just how you think. Do you remember that?
I do. That was a
So,
scary moment too. Because I was like, even by telling you that, I think people are going to walk out the door.
yeah. But talk about, can if you, to the degree that you feel vulnerable sharing, but like put me in your mental boardroom in those moments where you feel like you can't be your truest visionary self without scaring others, like if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, honestly, at this point, and really coming to peace with the different roles and the different dimensions and the different hats, I've come to really cherish the different roles
Hmm.
and the different places that people sit. So part of me is, and I think probably a lot of this maybe just comes as from my experience as a dad as well, is just like owning the vision for my family, but knowing that my kids are sort of where they're at today, and like we're just going to feed them what they need for today, even if it's something amazing like going on vacation. Like I know if I tell my kids, too far in advance about a vacation, they're going to be getting in so much trouble before
Hmm.
then, just because of their like overexcitement and too many times asking questions about it. And by the time we get to vacation, we'll be so sick of vacation. So there's like, I'm excited to tell them about vacation, but there's like a holding back, which is for the good of them, for the good of the whole system, for the good of me, for the good of the family. So, sitting in that seat, and this is actually just what happened as well. And when I got really vulnerable in this last retreat, what we've done, just to kind of unpack this a little bit more, is we've created a new methodology of accompaniment for people, taking the truth of the psychological sciences and sort of marrying it to a coaching modality. And so what happens is, I hit a wall in my own work years ago, and I felt like I could do more
Hmm.
with the therapy patients that were trusting me to really help them. And then I had just started doing coaching with, having an executive coach. And this executive coach was more available to me than I was to my patients. And I felt like that was really off. So, long story short, I ended up developing a new methodology, which we call mentorship. And it's got a fancy title, and it's trademarked and everything, and it's got a whole training system, and that's our certification that we're launching now. But the idea was, we're outside the box now of psychotherapy.
Yeah.
But what happened in this retreat is I had a student who graduated with a master's, and then she started working for us so that she could get her supervised hours towards licensure. And then she told me last year, she said, I don't think I'm going to keep getting my hours for licensure. I was like, well, what's wrong? What's going on? I thought something happened. Is she like leaving the profession or whatever? And she said, I believe in what you're doing, and I think that this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, and I don't need to get a license.
Wow.
And I was like, I don't even know what to say to that. It really struck me so deeply. I almost couldn't even process it. And then at this retreat, it was just striking me even more that I can't do what I am doing now if it's not for my team doing what they're doing. And I told her that. She was there, and I told her how much it meant to me. Like, I can only go so far with a vision when I don't have people receiving it. I mean, forget even getting to like market testing, and are you going to get customers, and is this going to produce revenue? Like, is this viable? Forget that. Like, to even have something at this scale that a team can believe in and then receive what you're doing and do what they need to do with it is the only thing that makes it possible. And something we've talked about a little bit more too is just that sort of marriage partnership. We called it the business marriage
Mm-hmm.
of like what's happening in this collaboration, even between like visionary and integrator. Like, can a visionary do what a visionary is best set up to do if there's not an integrator there?
Right.
And is there going to be a job for an integrator to hold together if it's not for the visionary? So,
Right.
just like in marriage, a man and a woman's role should not be seen as one superior to the other, even if we do have to figure out, and I'm not saying it should be tied to man or woman, but practically speaking, in every marriage, just like in every partnership, there's going to be certain things one person does to make up for what the other person's not doing, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to have this like deep reverence for that reality, that there's a place for both, and none of us are able to do what we're doing without the other. So that's what was striking me, and that's what started to sink in when I saw, and my team, they're just amazing people. They're just beautiful humans. And so when they were feeling so much pressure and stress, and they were so overwhelmed by my lack of direction, when you helped me see that, and because they weren't about to tell me how bad a job I was doing of leading, they were just suffering with it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you brought that in a very gentle way, but in a very clear way, it was like, this needs to get fixed. Like, you need to create expectations that they can follow. All I had to do is see the pain that it was causing, and then I just tapped into my deepest desire to give everybody here, myself included, the best shot possible at something really good. So there are moments, I can say this, over the past couple years that there's certain frustrations. Part of me will get frustrated when it's like, why can't they see it this way?
Sure.
Why can't they just let go? Why can't they just trust? But I look at it the same way that I talk about in marriage therapy, and even in my own marriage. There's plenty of times when, if I'm in the middle of some conflict with my wife, and I'm thinking to myself in my not so great moments, like, why can't she just see it the way I do?
Right.
It's like, well, if she thought the way I thought and was the way I was, and she had the same brain as me, like, she wouldn't be the woman who she is, whom I fell in love with, who's very different from me. And she's an entirely other kind of human person, not the same. And so that's why marriage is a beautiful thing, and that's why teams can be really amazing things. And I think that will give direction to allowing that reality of our own need to change to be a little softer and easier to swallow.
Because I know this, we have had this dialogue many times between us and even with some other CEOs, just the aha that they have about inviting different parts of themselves to a conversation, to the boardroom, to not silence any voice at a table, just like you wouldn't with your family or with your team that has something to say for the betterment of the company. It's easy to say that in concept or in theory, but it's hard. It's really hard to do that. And what you've done with mentorship in particular. So mentorship, literally, you can Vox your mentors on a daily basis. So instead of like
Yeah.
waiting for you to meet with your therapist every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, or however long it takes to get into the office, that's not what we're doing here. I'm literally Voxing my mentor on a daily basis if I need to. And the progress that somebody makes in 30 days versus 3 years is significant just because of the frequency and the just the frequency and intimacy and the fact that I can like replay the Voxer messages that my mentor gave me so I can further upon my own personal meditation or even share it with a companion. Like it's a game changer what you've done. You've literally changed people's lives by just getting out of the mold, like literally making your own playground and coloring it with bright colors, right? Now, with these CEOs who are, I mean, sometimes they come to me in desperation. Like they love the company. They're ambitiously frustrated. Their ambition is through the roof, and so is their frustration because they're nowhere close to where their vision is. And it can be demoralizing and they think that nobody will ever get it. Like that's some of that language that I start to hear in those darker periods. Where does one begin other than like literally getting a mentor? But like where does one practically begin?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, just to realize that there are these parts inside, these different voices, and that we have to make a decision to reverence them.
Mhm.
And I think be given permission from people who maybe are more experts in things psychological. And so if you're looking for that permission as a psychologist, I can give you permission that all of your voices inside are worth listening to. And that's what the best science tells us now. And so then you realize, okay, so if there's this inner conflict going on, if you don't look at it as an inner conflict, then it just spills out to the outer conflict. And
Yep.
then you hear an oppositional voice coming from another person, and it's not about that other person at all. It's about whatever the stronger part is inside of you that wants to defend itself, and it's used to fighting that fight because you're probably fighting it already internally.
Mhm.
So you have a voice, but if you can find that voice inside yourself first and then really listen and sort of be the internal family therapist to yourself, giving everybody in the room a chance to speak and
Yeah.
understanding what the common ground is and what the shared goals could
Yeah.
be. And, those are the kinds of things that will help resolve that conflict. Then when another person emerges, they don't represent a threat to some part of you. They actually are in line with one of your own parts. And you can say, I've heard that perspective before. Actually, part of me feels that way.
Mhm.
And this is how I've dealt with that to figure out what the best thing to do would be. But the disposition towards that person or towards that part inside is going to be kinder and gentler and
Yeah.
and with that kind of curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah, which is why some of my favorite leaders are leaders that lead with empathy, right?
Sure.
Is that it's and this is all Brene Brown works too, right? That vulnerability and empathy. But I can tell the listeners successfully that Beyonce now can sit and have a conversation with Becky with the good hair. The lion and the lamb can sit together without bloodshed. And it's still a work in progress. I mean, it gets, we use the word trigger, but like there's still moments where I feel that tension or wrestle, but it doesn't scare me, or I don't at least have the thought that it's wrong. It's an invitation every time now.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
it's and it's like each one of those parts has their need. So Beyonce even has her need
Yeah, she
and
does.
her purpose and her good that she's serving.
Sure.
So like even when I'm frustrated and I'm thinking like, why can't somebody think the way I do about this? It's
Hmm.
like, well, the way I think about this is good.
Hmm.
I don't want that to get squashed
Right.
in a conflict either.
Right.
And it's not about either I win or I lose.
Right.
So you don't have to lose just because you're maybe listening to and understanding another person's perspective, and you
Yeah.
kind of let it all. They're all members at the table. It's a very big table. There's a lot of seats at the table. We can let them all have a seat.
Yeah. No one has to be at the kids' table.
Yeah.
They can be in the plush corporate seats with their place. Because it's true. It is. I love what you said. Like I wouldn't kick my child out of the family when he's being difficult, nor would I kick my own internal child or my own parts or what, you know what I mean? Like I just love that. I love that visualization because it's just kind, and there's an invitation. There's a compassionate curiosity that I think is such a great lighthouse for a lot of us as leaders. If we could lead with more compassionate curiosity in our teams and what we do in ourselves.
Mm. And I think sometimes this is a derivative of this too. Talking specifically about kids, it's like we all have parts of ourselves that emerge during childhood,
Yeah.
and a lot of times those get buried.
Yep.
And I did a personal retreat last summer, and I was like really in touch with the fact that this childhood part of me disappeared.
Hmm.
And I was like, I like so much of that I'm doing, I'm so serious, and like everything has this urgency, And then I was like thinking back to like when I was a lot more playful and
Mhm.
fun and just like looking for things to be goofy about. And I was like, where did that little Greg go? Because it's still a part of me, but he's just been locked in a dungeon, put in the basement.
Yeah.
So it's like sometimes we have to do that work.
Yeah.
And it's not just about how do we manage the stuff that's up on the surface, but we can
Yeah.
also realize that there's a lot of stuff under the surface. And the more we do that work, and then if I can bring that part of me out and then let him sit at the table as well, all of a sudden everything I do becomes better.
Yeah. Yeah. It's why I think who you choose to surround yourself in your personal life, your life companion, but also the team can actually bring out some of those playful parts. At least that's I just like to make Dr. Greg laugh and cry. So both. Okay, we could talk, you and I, and we've done this before. We could talk for hours and hours and hours. But I feel so passionate for what you do to the point that if this doesn't work out, I'll give you a call. But
We both know it's going to work out.
but there's always week. um, but yeah, like I believe in mentorship, and you don't have to necessarily you don't have to be Catholic to actually participate in mentorship. So I just want to put that out there
Right.
because of the nature of what you do and how good your mentors are. But where can people learn more about you, Dr. Greg, Catholic Psych, and mentorship?
Sure. So Catholic Psych is catholicpsych.com. And then mentorship, its official name is IDDM. So that's Integrated Daily Dialogic Mentorship. And the website is iddmentor.com.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you haven't followed Dr. Greg or Catholic Psych on Instagram, you can even catch him doing some bicycling in his beautiful home for a reel. There's some good ones that Barbara gets of you that I really. There is the playful Dr. Greg that comes out and has the
That was
kids.
last time. Since then, I've been trying to come back out. I'm trying to convince our content director to let me do more reels.
Do
She
more
doesn't
fun
want to get
stuff.
into TikTok, so it's a little bit of a tug of war right
Yeah,
now.
her internal parts are like, I don't want to do TikTok. That's really funny. I'll talk to Amy Grace for you. Don't worry.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for and I think a conversation that everybody should listen to. I think honestly, I might even make this podcast a requirement for all of my members in the program to listen to this to be kinder to themselves and to their team because man, it's a game changer. It's a game changer.
Yes, thanks for having me. It's a great to be part of what you're doing.
Thanks for listening to the Rainmaker podcast. We believe you can't get real results or have real relationships that last without being real first. If you resonated with today's episode, leave us a review so we can keep serving up the truth and tips that help you become the empowered leader that I know that you are. And always head over to veronicarami.com to check out all the free resources I have for you and the show notes from this episode. Until next time, my friends.